Ryan, what's on your radar?
The Russian invasion of Ukraine has famously unified European countries, and you've no doubt seen the headlines about Switzerland breaking with its tradition of neutrality and freezing Russian assets, and Germany breaking with its hostility to military spending by announcing plans to pump some 100 billion euros this year into defense. But there's another shift underway that's getting far less attention, but could be far more consequential. Germany also announced it'd be pumping nearly €250 billion over the next few years into an effort to dramatically shift away from reliance on Russian energy. Now, that's also what the European public wants. The British public, in a new survey, said the same thing. By a 30-point margin, British voters said the country should move toward energy independence by pivoting to clean energy rather than by expanding fracking and increasing domestic production. The Biden White House is making similar arguments. But in our system, the government can't just count on members of its party to support the party's agenda in the legislature, an element of our system that is completely mystifying to Europeans. But Joe Manchin, apparently our de facto president, recently said he's on board for a major climate bill, so it's looking somewhat possible at this moment. Now, I talk a lot on this show about the need to shift to clean energy, but don't go into much detail. So to set a baseline for these conversations going forward, I wanted to pull some newly released projections from the Department of Energy. Now, these projections were released just last week, but they were completed before the bipartisan infrastructure bill was passed, and so they don't factor in some of those investments. And they don't factor in the climate bill, of course, since it hasn't passed yet. But they do offer some estimates of where we'll end up if clean energy prices decline by about 40% over the next few decades. So to start with, it's worth knowing where we are now. So that right there is fuel by fuel type. You'll see petroleum is at the very top, followed closely by natural gas. Way down, we have coal, roughly tied with nuclear, which is tied with other renewable energy. Down at the bottom is hydropower and fuels like ethanol. Okay, so where do we use our energy? So if you look at that one there, electric power is at the top, and that's largely fueled by natural gas now, with coal having collapsed and nuclear failing to deliver on its promises. Tied for second and third is the transportation sector and the industrial sector. And the more you electrify transportation, the more you increase the load on the grid. That's why it's incredibly important to get wind and solar generation expanded at the municipal level. All right, so where's the resistance coming from? So petroleum is expected to continue to be used in sectors with slow turnover to electric. You can see on the right here with this chart here that there's been a surge in electric vehicles, and the Department of Energy estimates that could flatten out, but it doesn't necessarily have to. So they see a slight decline in the number of gas-powered cars, but not by much. So next, let's look at electricity generation. So this is basically the grid. The middle chart there is the projection in the case of low costs for renewables, which we can kickstart with government subsidies and incentives, which is what Germany is planning to do. Now, if we do get those costs down, solar in the next chart overtakes natural gas as the leading source of energy in about 25 years, and wind climbs into third place. In just about 10 years, wind and solar combined would be producing more energy than natural gas. So those are projections based on us not doing much different than we're already doing. But if we got serious, we could do a ton more. So here's how the EU plans to cut Russian gas imports by 2/3 next year, and how they plan to cut it down to very little going forward. Now, it's basically an all-of-the-above strategy, but it's actually investing in everything. When we here in the US say all of the above, we mean we should spend a ton more money drilling. And also, if some homeowner wants to put solar panels on the roof, okay, that's fine. We won't stop them unless we're in Florida. Then actually, we will definitely stop them. But a real all-of-the-above strategy means actually investing big money into diversifying our energy sources. Biden and Manchin have a chance to do that now, and they shouldn't miss it. And Kim, I'm curious where you sense the public mood is right now when it, if you're watching, say, Fox News, you're hearing a lot of, we need to drill, and we need to get the gas prices down.
Yeah.
Which is a satisfying thing to say. But do you sense that there are people that are thinking, maybe this entire regime of being tied to dictators pumping oil isn't long-term the best solution.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. The one way to get everybody on board is war. We know that in this country, right? And so when we now see that there is an energy war in a way going on right now with Russia and with the OPEC plus countries and OPEC countries, a lot of people are talking about energy independence. And personally, I don't think you can be really a sovereign nation unless you are energy independent. I think that's part of it, as well as having your own defense. I mean, there are a few things, but certainly there's way more talk of being energy independent. Obviously, many people are saying drill and get more oil, but we do need to be looking at absolutely everything, and that would then move forward the other, the left agenda of going more towards renewable energy. So I think, we probably will see more drilling in the short term, but maybe there'll be more conversations about moving towards renewables for the long term. But we absolutely need to be energy independent.
I mean, we need to be we do, but because of the reality that like governments go to war and have national security objectives and fight with each other and do like not productive and economically efficient things, right? In an ideal world, in the Robbie ideal world, we don't need to be energy independent, just like we don't need to be food independent. We don't need to be cloth independent. We don't need.
You want to rely on
the economy's because you specialize. We specialize in one thing. Other people in other parts of the world specialize in other things. We all trade.
Until
That's
you go to
more
war.
Right. You're right. That is true. But ideally, there would not be war. There would not be governments having conflict with each other. You wouldn't. That is what's wrecking the system.
Well,
is
I like
the ambitions of some.
Too,
well, I know, but what's wrecking the system is the ambitions of authoritarian people in governments. Government is ruining.
And so
we don't need because you don't need to be independent in every you can take that logic to a crazy conclusion, right? That we have to produce all our plates in house, we have to produce all our furniture and all our everything.
Yes.
Then we'd just be North Korea. We'd just be an autarky that doesn't produce anything well because specializing is better.
Well, no, I mean you can still do it on your own shore, but still trade. So then you do have the competition, and you want to improve.
What? If we do everything here, what would be the point?
If somebody else makes a better plate than
what if they make better energy? Is what I'm saying.
Well, they might, but at least I would still be making it. So I mean, there needs to be. I think we've got to make everything here, and I think the pandemic kind of showed us that when we shut down and we couldn't get things, and we saw how reliant we are on China for cheap manufactured goods, like things like masks and hand sanitizer.
But that would be fine if the Chinese government wasn't crazy and trying to kill us all.
Well, but even if they weren't, it was the pandemic. I mean, the world shut down because the world was afraid of a virus. So even if it wasn't a sinister move, I mean, we could of course argue that whether or not it was, but let's just say for the sake of argument it wasn't, then it's just about shutting down the borders. You've got to be able to be self-sufficient if you want to be. Otherwise, you turn into Venezuela potentially very quickly.
On Fox News, when they talk about self-sufficiency, energy self-sufficiency, the first thing that they go to is Keystone XL. Biden shut down Keystone XL. There was some absolutely delightful pushback the other day. Can we play that clip from Fox where they talked about Keystone?
All right. So if that's not going to happen, Robert, perhaps, as Peter just reported, perhaps opening up the Keystone pipeline is not off the table for this White House. What did you take away from that?
I think XL is off the table. Let's recall a few things. One, it's the worst type of oil you can have. It's tar sands going from Alberta to the Gulf of Mexico. It wasn't going to really change anything to do with our oil supply. It was to export from the Gulf of Mexico. Also recall that under President Trump, well, let me just fit. Okay, it's not actually debatable. It has nothing to do with oil fields. It's a pipeline, and it was going to end at the Gulf of Mexico. That's a fact. You should look it up. And with respect to President Trump, as Stephen will tell you, only 10% of it was even done under his 4 years. So it's not about XL. It's about how do we become energy independent. I've always been supportive of the all-in energy approach for actually 10 years now.
That's interesting, Steve, because Robert's making the case that it's regional, and the White House is making the case that oil prices are global. So if we increase the overall oil output.
So if people take anything away from this segment, you should look up what XL stands for in Keystone XL. It stands for Export Limited. It is limited to exports. It's literally in the name that these are tar sands oil that you will put in a pipeline, funnel through the United States down to Louisiana, and then export it. It's in the name. But if you ask, and good for Fox News for having somebody on to push back, but otherwise the argument coming out of the right wing is if only we had Keystone XL going, then your gas would be $2 a gallon again.
The actual silver bullet here is to get rid of the Jones Act. But maybe I should do a radar on that in the future.
There you go. I'd love to hear that one.
Next week.
Excellent. Can't wait for it. So stick around until Monday for that one.
All right, well, MSNBC host Joy Reid has gotten some flack over her take on the media and the war in Ukraine. We're going to discuss with our Rising panel. That is coming up next.